Okay, welcome to Lunar Alchemy, and my name is John. If you haven't met me before, I'm here with Bella, who we're so happy to have with us today. And everyone that's joining us for this discussion, I'm really excited to be speaking with you about this particular gene key and this archetype, because it has a really impactful role in our society and in our individual experiences. And so that gene key 16, we have the shadow of indifference, an energy field that virtually impacts every human being on the planet. The city of mastery, an almost unimaginable explosion of expression into the world, and the pathway is the gift of versatility. And we're going to be talking about the archetype of the enthusiast, and the elements today are thunder over earth, which I think are going to come into an interesting way throughout this discussion. So I'm very excited to be talking about this one, just because it has so much to do with our unique essence expression, with the enthusiasm that we naturally exhibit as young children, and the process that we go through in our individual evolutions that allows us to move through this frequency band and become something new, a new expression in the world. So yeah, so welcome to this discussion, Bella. So gene key 16 and the enthusiast. It seems that this is one of the first archetypes we've looked at that has probably the most obviously understandable title in relationship to this particular gene key. I mean, if you think about indifference, what's the antidote to indifference? Enthusiasm. So what I want to ask you about today is, I would love to hear about your understanding of enthusiasm, both as a mechanical energy as it works through our system, and as a conscious opportunity, because sometimes I know that I've felt in my life when I've sort of succumbed to the veil of indifference, enthusiasm doesn't feel like a conscious choice. It just feels totally out of reach. So I'm curious about your perspective on how that works in terms of our conscious choices.
Let's start with the mechanical answer. So enthusiasm in the 16 is about identifying with something so much so that you put your whole you in it, and it becomes a process where that thing in you become one. So that's the mastery. That it starts with you and the guitar, and like you identifying with that beautiful instrument. I couldn't leave the guitar, my mom's guitar in my dad's apartment, although I've never played guitar, but I just felt like you can't leave an instrument like that, because I know how people are making art with that. So I needed to bring it with me a few days ago. And that, for me, that is when you identify so much with it. And I mean, I know people, when you're playing guitar, like you have to like destroy your fingertips first, and then you have to like have long nails if you're a man, like all kinds of things that not everybody would do. And for me, that is really truly what enthusiasm is. It's to identify with something so fully so that it becomes part of your expression and of your being. Yeah, and I guess that with the 16, it doesn't do that with just one thing. So in a life, it can do it with many things. And it's going to, in the mastery phase, there's also something that goes beyond what's been done with a guitar before. And that is something that we can see. I have the 16 in my in my sphere of relating. So Mercury. And I know that J-Lo is on the call. She has it in her IQ, I think. So the way her mind works. And you can see it. It's not like, it's also that weaving that goes beyond identifying with just one thing. Then enthusiasm can also come from the versatility of weaving many things that you identify with together. And that, I feel, is why it's also innovating. Although you would think, oh, it's just doing this one thing and learning to play this one song or music. No, that's the master goes beyond what's been there before. So that was the first question. And I don't remember what the second question was.
Well, I'll share it again, but I want to just kind of like interject into that description of that identification with, for me, it feels like a process. Maybe it's a guitar or, you know, a skill that we think of when we're first engaging with it. But the deeper we get into a skill, we begin to realize more and more that a skill is simply a process that has been repeated over and over into a state of familiarity. So something that we don't have skill in, essentially we can understand as something that we don't have familiarity with, and a process that we haven't explored over a period of time in order to fully understand it and identify with it, to embody that. So I love how this particular gene key, this description, gives us a way to understand embodiment when we have these sort of spiritual concepts that we're considering, and want to consider, how do we get it into our bodies? You know, this gene key is the key to, or at least one of the keys to that process of being able to essentially, you know, if we think about practicing the guitar, and, you know, by the way, they have to have their left hand short nails, right hand long nails. So it's even sort of more bizarre when you meet them and shake their hands and you're kind of like, what is going on here? And they're like, oh, I'm a classical guitarist. Anyways, I went to a music school, so there were plenty of those guys around. They were amazing. Anyways, I don't want to get too sidetracked today. So yes, this process of practicing with a process until it becomes familiar in our bodies. And so I was kind of curious if, you know, speaking about the mechanics of it, Bella, when we look at how do we choose enthusiasm, how does it become part of our conscious awareness, our conscious choices, especially when we're in a state of potential indifference, cynicism, apathy, all of those kind of descriptors that go along with this particular energy?
I don't believe we choose it. That's the whole thing. I think that we are unique and different things are going to spark us. And I was sharing on the call before that the first day when I had French in school, I think I was maybe 13 or 14 years old, and I came home with a book and I was telling my mom and my eyes were shining. You all know language is for me something that I identify with, but it's not like I decided that I'm going to be enthusiastic learning languages. I never decided that, but it was something that even when I was 18 months old, apparently I loved to speak and explain things to my parents in 2 languages. So for me, I never chose that consciously. Like a 1.5-year-old is not going to choose. So I do think it has something to do with environment, because my mom was a school teacher before she kind of changed career. And of course I had all the possibilities when I was like 4 years old, I could already write. So of course it was an influence by the environment, but it's not a conscious choice. So I don't believe that you can be like always with the shadows. You can't be in indifference and be like, oh, let me get a little bit motivated by something. I actually think that that's a bypass, and that is going to take us out from the potential doorway that shadow is, to kind of really dissolve that shadow indifference on a deeper level. It's not by running away trying to find the gift that transmutation will happen.
Beautiful. Yeah, that sounds to me like the experiences or the activities, the practices, if you will, that inspire enthusiasm inside us is something that comes intrinsically with us, like a facet of our fractal nature that is something that we discover along the path of our experience in this body. And when I think about children exhibiting their boundless enthusiasm for what they're involved in, whether it's play or they've honed in on a specific, you know, my niece is 3 years old and she loves coloring in coloring books. And most of her coloring is she'll take one color and color the entire image, but she loves the process of bringing this blank paper into this massive blast of color. She just loves filling it in. And that's a natural form of enthusiasm that, you know, of course, one day that could evolve into an enthusiasm for painting or other forms of visual art. But we really have no idea where that's going when the child is so young and is just exploring this enthusiasm. We don't really know what it is about that activity that really gets their energy turned up and their excitement about what they're doing. You know, Bella, you're saying you're at 4 years old, you're already writing, and obviously your mastery of so many different languages shows that your enthusiasm for language in general as a field of communication, as an expression of the beauty of human experience, as the facets of different ways of understanding the same thing. You know, obviously in the environment you grew up in, you were able to learn, I assume, Spanish and Swedish. How about the other languages that you've learned and are able to express yourself through? You know, how did you experience that enthusiasm moving through you? Were there challenges or blocks to that happening? Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I really think it's actually a quite good example, my identification with languages of what we're speaking about. So definitely they were there from the beginning. You can see I was writing letters to my mom when she was like out on a meeting, and I was saying like, when I was 4 years old, I'm sitting here eating dinner with dad, and I like my hand was like stuck in a, like things like that. So it was, that was the way I wanted to express it, even if my mom was going to come back 2 hours later. So you can see it was already there and it was natural. The thing is, I feel that for me, that is it's kind of how I relate to life, because at the end of the day, I learned French. Yes, I learned French in school, but then 4 years later I moved to France. Like, so I identified the language and I'm like, oh my god, how can you have like feminine and masculine? How can an adjective be written like differently if it's for a girl dog or a boy dog? Like, you know, there was like so many epiphanies of how language is constructed, because I think English is kind of like, you know, I learned that earlier, but it was closer to Swedish and more like, but French was like its own thing. And then I moved to France, and then it was the identification with the language took me into like really understanding the culture. And also it's the hardest language I ever learned, so it was something that really was a challenge, and I could feel that there was a barrier between me and the other person, especially when there was like things that were important, like social security or something like that. Like I could feel the barrier, and I could feel like impotent. So I think there was a part of me like also that wanted it for that. But then the fluidity, or today when I go and do my hair, one of my hairdressers, they're a couple, he always says like, how is it possible that like you, it's like you, I know they know a lot of Russian people, and he's like, how can you speak almost without an accent? So of course there is something there where it's natural for me. But I also know when I moved to Italy, then it was natural for me in 8 months. And I was much more accepted right away in Italy, because they are not as snarky or whatever like French people. So they are actually helping you, and they take you into the family. And then I felt like I got an Italian identity. And when I was working in Portugal, or in Brazil, it was similar there. So for me, it has been to be like this, like when I can be like this with a language, with a culture, otherwise I did a year of German in school or in university, and I never say I speak German, because there was nobody to be in friction with, like I didn't have friends, and I also like, for what? So for me, the identification has been, how can I, and I always kind of go to that, how can I make love more to this? How can I live this more alive and intense? And that's always what it has been. And that's why I feel like it's the same thing, like when you're attracted to somebody, it's like you're going to be attracted to somebody and not to somebody else. It's like there is something inherent in us. And that goes to the question that Terry was asking before. He was saying, so enthusiasm is already in the body or in the soul or in both. No, I think that enthusiasm is a response to something that you believe is beautiful, exciting, whatever it is, challenging. Like it's a response that comes from a place of you that it's not from the mind, I believe. I don't think you can become Mozart or, like I think it's something it's like dormant in you, and then you're reflected with that thing, and then like kind of the meeting happens with it.
Yeah,
then
so
it unfolds through the body. Like, I mean, I would love to hear you and the saxophone. It's like my question, John. Like, you have that, like not symbiosis, but that teamwork, synergy with instruments. So, and I never had that in that sense with something, with instrument in that sense. So, I would love to hear your experience with that.
Yeah, so my experience with this particular energy, I'm extraordinarily familiar with it because of that. And it begins, and I want to also speak to Terry's question about, is it in the body, or is it in the soul, or is it both? What a great question. I have both the harmonic gate and the programming partner for the 16. So I have the 48 from the spleen and the 16 or the 9 in the sacral chakra, moving the sacral energy center, moving down to the root. So when I experienced the 16, it was aspirational as it came through my experience in relationship to music. And of course, my primary experience was the harmonic gate of the shadow of inadequacy, which lit a fire in me to overcome my lack of skill, right? Because I could recognize that people with talent truly expressed a transcendent level of skill. And I was always aware of that, keenly aware of it. I remember when I first heard my favorite saxophone player ever in the world and of all time. And I was 14 years old, and he was playing at the jazz festival in my hometown with a trumpet player who was from my same state of Iowa, which seemed like such an unlikely place for a absolute top echelon jazz musician to come out of. But he was like a kid genius. At age 17, he won this international jazz competition where, he was just an absolute phenomenal player at such a young age. And, even at age 20, 21, he was recording albums that were of music that were just, his skill was transcended. He was purely in that realm of talent, and really fantastic. So the saxophone player was playing there, And I heard him and my jaw like hit the floor, because I was like, oh my God, I can't believe someone is actually doing that with this instrument. I've never heard anything like it before, period. And for years and years after, when for like the next 8 years of my life, I would tell people about this guy and they would go like, yeah, whatever, you know, and you know, even when I got to New York City and I'm in this conservatory that is extraordinarily exclusive, only 800 students, of which there are only 200 in the jazz program, maybe. And, you know, they only accepted 5 saxophonists the year that I came in. So, you know, like, these people know what's up. And it was so funny to me to watch the transformation when everybody else kind of caught up. And now everybody's favorite saxophone player is the same guy. So for me, that recognition of talent fed my desire to overcome inadequacy. Again, remember, this is my teenage self, like dealing with this shadow energy in the best way that I knew how. So I really engaged with the saxophone, but I never experienced anything close to the level of mastery until I quit. And I had learned about mastery during the process, because there were musicians who were engaged in, this is my purpose, mastery is my purpose, of becoming like a pure channel for music, and with no resistance in me. In fact, almost like autonomic movement from the body, just responding to every moment, and total mastery of what is being expressed. And I became aware of that, and I learned how to practice to develop that, which I did. But I never experienced it until after I quit. And then after months, years even of not practicing, I would get up on stage and perform, and I would just like find this like flow of expression that I had never felt before. Like, it just wasn't gonna stop. And I would have to like consciously stop myself from playing, even though the stream wouldn't turn off. Like, it wasn't done yet. I could just keep going and going and going. It was really, really an incredible experience to have, and an amazing revelation to recognize that overcoming inadequacy was really never truly a part of mastery. Obviously, if you're in a field of inadequacy, you can't experience mastery. However, I didn't have to beat it. I didn't have to overcome it. I didn't have to fix it. I only had to become, as you're saying, Bella, one with the process. And once that happened, incidentally, from the age of 14, I pretty much, I didn't entirely, I was still doing it, but not totally seriously. I pretty much hung up my practice of music. In my intense practice, we're talking 4 to 5 hours every single day, 365 days a year. I hung up the practice because I had to make money. I was living in New York City, and like 2001 just happened. There were no more gigs. Like 9/11, I mean, in 2001, 9/11 kind of devastated the city. And so I didn't practice anymore. That was 7 years, essentially, after that 14-year-old decided, this is what I'm doing. So it's exactly what Richard Rudd discusses, is that in order to achieve that gift of versatility, it just takes 7 years of embodiment, of embodying that process of becoming familiar. And so as soon as I hung it up, I had access to versatility, which was just like the biggest shock when I realized it. Because I found it after not practicing, when normally I would say, oh my gosh, I'm so inadequate, I haven't been practicing, I'm gonna suck when I perform. And then I'd pick up the saxophone and I wouldn't suck. I'd be kind of awesome, which, you know, surprised me because it's not what I expected. So, yeah, that's my whole story with the 16. So I hope you enjoyed it, everybody.
I love the story. What's the line you said again? What's the line?
Of my 16, of the six, I don't have the 16.
Oh, you only have the harmonic gate and the,
I only have,
the
yes, I only
partner.
have the harmonic gate and the programming.
So then for
partner.
us, it's an electromagnetic, which is really cool too.
Yes, exactly. So my relationship with it was, like I said, aspirational.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get to experience that energy directly through me. I could experience it through other people, though, which is what plays into my story about my favorite saxophonist ever. Like, I knew exactly what that energy was because he was expressing it in its fullest expression. I mean, like, dude is an absolute master. Like, I don't know if he's in the Citic frequency, but if there's a Citic saxophone player, he's the guy.
Now we have to look him up. Now I need to listen to that. Maybe all night while I'm packing and unpacking and not falling asleep to go to the airport at 6. If I think I want to listen to that.
Well, he can, his music is, he has a wide variety of styles. He's played with Steely Dan in their recovery tour. They're you know, Steely Dan, the
Does
band.
He have like Latin jazz? Of course, I'm gonna ask. Like Latin jazz?
I know that he is on some recordings of that. His own recordings are not generally in that field. He spent his first like 15 years primarily known for playing with some of the best other jazz musicians at the time. And his own stuff, you know, it's a very particular quality, which I could understand if somebody wasn't really into it, but his mastery of the saxophone is like unbelievably mind-blowing. You can watch him on YouTube and stuff. Anyways,
and what is the line of your 48?
The 48 is, obviously I don't know these. So it's my Pluto, and I have the 6th line in my personality.
I mean, that is so perfect. It's so transcendental in a way, because Pluto is the biggest transformation, but also the transformation that's furthest away and can be hardest to tap into, because we continue to go around here and the soul wants to go through that transformation, but we're often kind of going around in the same soul patterns. And the 6th line, as we all know, is like, it's transcendental too. So somehow, you know, to what you're speaking, it's really perfect that it's there. And I believe that I was a little bit colored when I was saying how I relate to identifying with something. I could feel like it was a lot of that tone of a 2nd line that, you know, wants to make love to life and wants to dance with life and wants to like do this. And I can hear that I'm colored by that, because also that is my expression, because it's my Mercury and it's my communication and relating. So I can also see, and I feel responsible to say that if you have another line there, you know, it's in your 16, it might be a bit of a different taste of it, you know, or tone of it. So a first line might, you know, go deeper and investigating, and then the second line is kind of the spontaneous love. So there might be another way too to maybe start to identify with something, you know. And then what I was just saying, like love at the first sight, let's merge, you know, like that might not always be for everyone. And when you have a 6th line, it's going to be a process. So that's why you're kind of speaking about the stages of discovery, and then the stages of your own experimentation, which we know the 6th line always have a phase when it has to try it and maybe not be so good at it. And then kind of like you let it go. You're up on the roof and you're like, I let it go. And then you come down into the world or up to the stage, and then you have flow again. So it's like, it's so perfect to look at the line as well as the process of expression. And the 6th line, especially with what you're saying, is like, yeah, he did it. He did all the stages of the 6 to really find the depth of expression and of, I guess, like finding true relationship and flow with the instrument.
Yeah, absolutely. JLo's made an interesting comment, I think, which referring to getting a driver's permit, where she would study for the test, go show up and fail, and then instead of studying said, let me just go do it, and then you passed. One of the qualities that enthusiasm has, at this archetype has, is that it can bring access, if you are in alignment with this archetype and this energy. It brings alignment with access to capabilities that you do not have familiarity with. So in the case of studying and versus winging it, like either you study for a test or you wing it. In the case of studying, I would guess it likely involved a certain aspect of your body that didn't allow you to be fully involved, merging with the studying process. But your body was likely able to fully merge with the driving process and the imagination of what that is like, which is what would be engaged while you're taking the test. And when that is engaged, you have access to the correct answers because they live inside your body. And often. And yes, so especially when we come across children who struggle with subjects like math or sciences, children who struggle with studying at all, is because their body is not fully engaged in the process of studying. They need more engagement with their body before any studying is going to change anything about their familiarity. This is also a massively important gene key for understanding development of children, how they learn, and how our system in the US of education is really not serving so many children because it cuts off their access to their innate enthusiasm, which I'm hoping Bella will get to talk about as sort of arising from the body. I don't know what you think about that, but
I'm writing very enthusiastically in the chat.
Yes, of course, that's all right. It's a fantastic chat so far. I'm loving seeing it go by, and I'm sorry I'm not able to respond to absolutely everything.
But I would love to respond to that. Like,
please.
It made me like sit back and feel so sad because I was one of these kids who was intelligent and who had a good preparation, like, for school. And I think that there are a few things that made me feel so out of my body, so constricted. I have a 25 in my IQ in a 6 line. Like, all my innocence was taken away is what I feel. And I just it was drying up in a constricted thing, because it felt for me that the way that school was done, I'm super idealistic. I have hope in my motivation, and I have the 11 twice. I'm super idealistic, and then all the 6 lines. So I wanted to have, if you can have A+, I wanted to have that. But the strain I had to put on myself, I have receptive variables. So I'm not supposed to be focused and strategic and learn this so I can, no, I'm supposed to, it's all about taking in and just being a receptacle. So the way that I love to learn is to be immersed, live in Rome, 200 meters from the Sixtine Chapel, and just like be there and eat the food and like, that's the way that I learn. And then in school, I forced myself to have A+ in everything for 20 years. It's something that I still don't understand, how I could identify so much with what I hated. And the thing is, I wasn't identified with that. I couldn't give less about that. But for me, and now I'm kind of analyzing myself, but for me, because I have a connection between my throat and my G, what I could express in those tests and everything, it became like my value, who I am. Because that's how, not because I think that's who I am, but I see that they are judging me for that. So for me, the identification was with being good enough, which is also a completely open ego thing. So to be good enough, I strained myself. And for me, when I think back, I really believe it depends on the child, because there are children that kind of surf through school and they, and they are like medium. They are not super good. They are not super bad, and they kind of surf through it. And then there are kids, all kinds of kids in all kinds of levels. And, I think that for most of us, it's not ideal. But I also see that when you don't identify so much, if you have kind of like, I don't know, the cushioning to not identify too much with school. And if I ever have kids, I'll tell them, like, don't identify so much with this, because it's not worth it. But I guess that parents, it can be both ways. But yeah, I got kind of a little bit carried away with my own process. I think it's sad. I really think it's sad all the time that I used to be talented in school, when I could have used that time on something I was truly identifying with, not trying to prove that I was good enough.
Yeah, it's, when we look at those 7-year cycles, what you're talking about speaks directly into how that impacts the development of a child. When between the ages of 7 and 14, we're developing our emotional bodies fully. That need to be accepted, to be celebrated, to be nourished through emotional attention, causes us to respond to the environment and the activities set in front of us in just the way that you're describing. And then as we begin to develop our mental processes in the next 7-year cycle between 14 and 21, then our thoughts all move in the same direction as that emotional imprint that we've already embodied and received. And so it is entirely natural, in my opinion, for a child to fully identify their personality with exactly what you're saying, which when you look at it in hindsight, you're like, that wasn't me at all. So why would I identify with that at all? I believe it's because of the true development process that we have coming into our full beingness as an adult, and the systems that we have set up to that either support that or kind of give it obstacles along the way. And I mean, I did it too. When I was 17 years old, I was, found myself, I was like, man, I want to be practicing. I want to be playing saxophone. And instead, I was studying my AP European history class, and was just, at one point, I was like, you know what? Screw it. I don't care about the A anymore. Like, I'm going to be this person, and to be this person, I can't be that person, the person that is perfect in school. And I still got an A in that class, but I ended up getting a C in government or something. It was like my only non-A ever in high school. And I was so pissed off because it was such a dumb class. And the teacher, I don't know. Anyways, that was like the beginning of the breaking of the ego structure that was connected in that way for me. So, I mean, let's talk about the elements real quick, so we can talk about how it comes through our physical bodies, because I would love to hear your perspective on thunder coming out of the earth. I know that normally we say thunder over earth, but in the I Ching, it's actually described as emerging from the earth. The thunder is emerging out of the earth. Thunder is the movement of sound. So the discharge of electricity generates the sound, which then moves the energy of that electricity outwards. So it's movement up and out of the ground. It's the thing that creates summer. It's what allows summer to happen. So Bella, I'm wondering, I'd love to hear your perspective on this, and where does this live in the body, if you feel inspired to share that too?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the translation. So here it says thunder strikes the earth. And I like what you just said, and kind of, the way that you have looked into the I Ching with that. I mean, the first feeling I have here is what I was saying with that French book. And I came home and it's like, it was literally like, now I sound like you, J-Lo. I don't have an open throat, but that's how you would say. I literally, I could feel how I was struck by something. And my mom still speaks about it, decades after it happened. And I knew that something had been touched in me, like something was striking me. And then again, what we were saying right before, how does that come into the body? Because we have the earth under the form. So how does it come in? Like, how can I hold it? And for me, the journey was to move to France as an 18-year-old. So I was a student and I moved there, and then I become an adult in a completely different culture where I was completely immersed in what had 7 years earlier, almost. Like, yeah, I was still there 7 years, but it felt like that process. How can I hold this? How can I embody this? How can this be how can this lightning become part of me? And that's the simple way of speaking to it.
So where do you feel that in your body when you have that, like, that feeling, like when you think about your 18-year-old self and you're like, I'm going to France, like, where is that feeling in your body?
I
Where
mean,
is it
here maybe
coming
the
from?
16 comes in again, because it wasn't like that was just one. It wasn't like, oh, I'm so in love with France. It was like, this is one part of the journey. I need to like I need to meet this. And so that was the part of it in that sense. I here it says realizing receptivity. Realizing is that 16, that logical process, that identification and there's receptivity. So I feel as well, it is about realizing what we are receptive to. And I was receptive to that. And I was going to stay, I think, 6 months or 12 months. And then I ended up staying 6 years. So there is something about realizing how you're receiving that in you, and how that is becoming a part of you. And I can't feel that it was in a particular place, but I felt like I needed to. For me, it felt like this. I needed to do this. This is the best way I can explain, like I did before. I need to do this with it, and that's the thing I realize about this. Everything, like, if I can't do this with something, I'm not so interested. So for me, enthusiasm has to be with something where I can feel it. If I can't feel it, if I can't become intimate with it, then it's not interesting. And I think that there's nothing, well, yeah, very few things you become as intimate with as a language, because it actually shifts you. You're not the same person in different languages. So you realize your receptivity, and then you become like a completely unique version of yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love your sharing and the awareness of the need for that friction, because it strikes me here, it says thunder strikes the earth, but some of you may also know that sometimes lightning emerges from the earth and goes up, depending on how the ions are being reversed. Sometimes there can be a reversal of the ions, and then the lightning actually goes upwards. But when you're describing, Bella, it really describes to me that feeling of, like, if you were struck by lightning, the immense amount of friction of energy that would happen. It's like such a great description for that. One of the things that I notice about enthusiasm is it is so connected with excitement. And because it's connected with excitement, if we look at the shadow frequency of excitement, we have fear, which one of my favorite phrases that, like, changed my awareness in so many ways was, fear is just excitement without the breath. So when your body constricts, around something that is exciting to you, you experience fear. When you don't have a full, deep, relaxed body breath, which also means that if you're afraid of something, afraid of doing something, if you can add that full, relaxed body breath, eventually you will be able to find the excitement that is an opportunity for you in whatever it is you're afraid of. And I'll admit that is a challenging, like when you're really afraid of something, like just adding breath usually isn't going to change that just like that. But if you if you identify yourself with that process of like, oh, I'm afraid, breathe. And you do that enough to become familiar with the feelings in your body. Eventually, you'll reach versatility with this, and you will be able to experience a full-on transformation of fear into enthusiasm for whatever activity you're doing. And you can see this in people who sort of match society's definition of who is successful, because they often talk about like speaking in front of large numbers of people, getting out of their comfort zone. What does that mean? Like when there's a person giving a speech on stage about getting out of your comfort zone and how important it is, it's like, what does that mean? You go and do something that you're afraid of. But when you hear the person on stage talking about it, they're excited about it. That just means that they've done this transformation. They're familiar with that breath and they know what those feelings feel like. So Bella, I wanted to segue so we don't go too far over time.
I just want to say this thing because it's kind of what you were saying about the process.
Please.
So, and also what I felt, it's really a process. So when you start, here we see versatility is initiating orientation. So it's not that you go to France and you know we're going to stay for that many years. It's not that you knew when you're 14 that you're going to be in that special school in New York. It is really that with that lightning, you start to initiate, and we know the second gene orientation is about in the now. You're orienting from that magnetic monopole that is who you are, so really just remembering that it's usually not, oh, okay, I'm going to be a master of this. It's something that tickles you and you start to orient with it, and that's how it starts to develop. And some of the things, it's a long journey, and some of the things are shorter journeys. So that's just what I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had just an absolutely outstanding discussion going on in the chats, and I wish that we were all evolved to the degree where we could have multiple conversations simultaneously through the telepathic connection that is the destiny of humanity someday in the future after this 55th gene key happens. But I really appreciate everyone's participation in this discussion. I wanted to just simply share with you the content of the transmission that we'll be doing today around this. And I want you to feel into this. This is a perspective about what is possible as far as a reality. And if we consider the components of enthusiasm, what we're looking at is a life impulse, what we may call like a pure desire, not in the gene key's shadow of desire sense that I carry so well, but a pure desire that is truly in harmony with all that you are. And enthusiasm is the bridge between that desire and the activity into reality in our bodies. And so when we look at these two elements of the pure desire moving up into the activity, what we're looking at in our energetic system is the sacral chakra and the solar plexus chakra, because that is what is governed by these two energy centers in our vertical 7 chakra system. So what's in between there? Our gut. And I would like to suggest that if enthusiasm truly arises out of the depths of our gut, and it is the thunder is the result of the second brain that exists down there, the electricity of the many, many, many neurons that exist within our digestive system. So that is what we are going to be activating today, is that full-on connection between that pure desire and the movement into activity or versatility, if the frequency running through you is at that level. So thank you all for joining us. We need to move on to that transmission. We will look forward to seeing you in a future discussion, and I'm sending loving presents from my heart to yours. For all of our solar members, go ahead and click on the second link for the transmissions in the live session area, and we will meet you there shortly. So bye-bye for now.